All right, so we're going to go through the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, uh, translated by Swami Nikhilananda. And today we're on page 266, and it is Sunday, July 22nd, 1883. Taking advantage of the holiday, many householder devotees visited Sri Ramakrishna in his room at Dakshineshwar Temple Garden. The young devotees, mostly students, generally came on weekdays. Sometimes the master asked his intimate disciples to come on a Tuesday or a Saturday, days that he considered to be very auspicious for special religious instruction. Adhar, Rakal, and M come from Calcutta in a hired carriage. Had come from Calcutta in a hired carriage. Sri Ramakrishna had enjoyed a little rest after his midday meal, and the room had an atmosphere of purity and holiness. On the walls hung pictures of gods and goddesses, among them one of Christ rescuing the drowning Peter. Outside the room were plants laden with fragrant flowers, and the Ganges could be seen flowing toward the south. The master was seated on the small couch facing the north, and the devotees sat on mats and carpets spread on the floor. All eyes were directed toward him. Mani Malik, an old Brahmo devotee, about 65 years of age, came to pay his respects to the master. He had returned a few months earlier from a pilgrimage to Benares and was recounting his experience to Sri Ramakrishna. Mani Malik: a monk whom I met in Benares said that no religious experience is possible without the control of the sense organs. Nothing could be achieved by merely crying, God, God. Master: do you understand the views of a teacher like him? According to them, one must first practice spiritual discipline, self-restraint, self-control, forbearance, and the like. Their aim is to attain nirvana. They are followers of Vedanta. They constantly discriminate, saying Brahman alone is real and the world illusory. But this is an extremely difficult path. If the world is illusory, then you too are illusory. The teacher who gives the instruction, equally illusory. His words too are illusory as a dream. But this experience is beyond the reach of the ordinary man. Do you know what it is like? If you burn camphor, nothing remains. When wood is burned, at least a little ash is left. Finally, after the last analysis, the devotee goes into samadhi. Then he knows nothing whatsoever of I, you, and the universe. You know, this is one of the points that's kind of hard to make, because Advaita Vedanta, or the practice of non-dual Vedanta, is very popular in the West. People enjoy it quite a bit, and they like that path because there's this idea that it minimizes the idea of God. And but you know, I think a lot of times in our culture, we really don't have the experience of seeing these enlightened souls. And Ramakrishna says that you're that as long as you're aware of objects, as long as you're aware of objects, you're not ready for that Advaitic practice, for that Advaitic path. So that's the that's the standard we're talking about. It's very difficult to get to your mind to the state of quiet, to the state of calmness, to where it doesn't see objects, where it doesn't see itself as separate from the whole. In Advaita, it's you that disappear into God. It's not that God disappears or that it doesn't deal with God. It's that God is the only reality. We are like characters in his dream. And so our own reality is only real as long as we maintain an ego, as long as that ego self is here. And that ego self forms through attachment only. So the things that you're attached to, meaning the thoughts in your mind that you think are your thoughts, are thoughts that you're attached to. And so all objects, all people, the world, all of them exist to us really only as a thought. Although we don't see it that way, we see them as being real externally to ourselves. But in fact, the world that we experience is a world of symbols that we've created within our own mind through information from the senses and through our sorting of memories, and conjuring together this view of the world. And so that's why Ramakrishna is saying that it's a very high path. It's very difficult. It's almost, well, he says, out of reach for the ordinary man. Ramakrishna was a practitioner of all the paths, no doubt, and all of them function. And he teaches them. They're all given for based on the disposition of seekers. So not all of us will take the same path. But he was very much in favor of bhakti, the practice of devotion, because love is the nature of the divine reality. Even in Advaita, that Satchitananda, that one without a second, is of the nature of wisdom and love and being or existence. And so Ramakrishna says bhakti is much, much more quick, because that level of purity is not necessary for realization in that path. And grace is the main function. And that in bhakti, it has the unique quality of where the path and the goal are the same. So your practice of love and your realization of love are one and the same on the path of bhakti. And so through the bhakti, that love is what helps the mind unify itself, is what helps bring it to a singularity, helps you it quiets itself in the presence of divine love. And so in bhakti, you're working on being aware of that inner divine presence at all time. And that becomes your dominant experience of life. It becomes more emphasized in your mind than the real world, the real world. There I go saying that. Can you imagine? The real world does. And so, Thakur would see God before he would see the room he was sitting in. We have that example when that untouchable comes to salute him, and Ramakrishna sees the man walk into the room, and immediately Ramakrishna does a full Ashtanga Pranam, meaning right down on his face on the floor to salute the untouchable. Now, the untouchable was completely alarmed at that reaction, because for him to be an untouchable and for a holy man to salute him, to bow to him like that, he felt like that would almost bury him in karma. How would he ever be able to pay that debt? And so he complains that, he says that to Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna says, no, it is not like that. You see, when you entered the room, I saw the divine, and it was only after a few moments that I saw you. And so Ramakrishna saw the divine presence in human beings before he saw the ego presence in them. And so his first reaction at seeing this man was one of worship. And he went down and bowed before the Lord. So you see, this is the level at which Ramakrishna experienced life. I mean, this is the level of purity in his mind. And it's hard for us, especially being in the workaday world, it's really hard for us to imagine somebody that sees God so distinctly in a human being that his first reaction is to fall flat on the floor in worship of that divinity. But that is what a pure mind is. That is what someone who has, dedicated everything to their love of God, to their realization of the truth. And so it's a very, very high bar. And we should always tuck that to the back of our mind. It's really good for our humility. Because I know practitioners quite often in the West, we'll start meditating, we'll do it for a month or two, and suddenly we have a little tingle in the spine, or we feel a certain amount of bliss, or we might catch a little light while we're sitting, and we run around thinking we've realized. We start running out, becoming teachers and gurus and whatnot. And so understand that the experiences that we're talking about, the intensity of spiritual life, is all-encompassing, complete absorption of the self in this bliss, in this presence. But this experience is beyond the reach of ordinary man. Do you know what it's like? If you burn camphor, nothing remains. That's what he's talking about. That the no you remains in the high at the height of this practice. When wood is burned, at least a little ash is left. Finally, after the last analysis, the devotee goes into samadhi. Samadhi is that state of union. In the highest samadhi, there's no consciousness of a separate entity at all from the whole, from the divine. In the lower samadhis, and there's several different layers of samadhi, but in the lower ones, there's a sense of I can remain. And Ramakrishna says about his bhakti or his devotional devotees, he says that some of them are more interested in the company of their beloved, in the company of God. They don't want to become God. They don't want to dissolve. He says it in the way they don't want to become sugar. They want to taste sugar. And so he says there's an allowance for that in the divine reality. For those folks who are in love with God and their highest ideal is not merging, their highest ideal is just being in the constant company of the beloved, of pure love. And he mentions, that God takes a form when the devotee, when the devotion of a devotee freezes him into a form that represents their highest ideal. And he says there are places in the ocean where the ice never melts. And so he does allow for what seems like a forever place where you can live in the company of God rather than in the dissolution, in the merging with the divine. Padma Lochan was a man of deep wisdom. He had great respect for me, though at that time I constantly repeated the name of the Divine Mother. He was the court pundit of the Maharaja of Burdwan. Once he came to Calcutta and went to live in a garden house near Kamarhati. I felt a desire to see him and sent Hriday there to learn if the pundit had any vanity. I was told that he did not have any. Then I met him. Though a man of great knowledge and scholarship, he began to weep on hearing me sing Ram Prasad's devotional songs. We talked together for a long time. Conversation with nobody else gave me such a satisfaction. He said to me, "Give up the desire for the company of devotees. Otherwise, people of all sorts will come to you and make you deviate from your spiritual ideal." Once he entered into a controversy by correspondence with Uchavananda, Vaishnav Charan's guru. He told me an interesting incident. Once, a meeting was called to decide which of the two deities, Shiva or Brahma, was the greater. Unable to come to any decision, the pundits at last referred the matter to Padmalochan. With characteristic guilelessness, he said, "How do I know? Neither I nor any of my ancestors back to the 14th generation have seen Shiva or Brahma." About the renunciation of lust and greed, he said to me, "One day, why have you given up those things? Such distinction as this money and that is clay are the outcome of ignorance." What could I say to that? I replied, "I don't know all these things, my dear sir, but for my part, I cannot relish such things as money and the like." There was a pundit who was tremendously vain. He did not believe in the forms of God. But who can understand the inscrutable ways of the divine? God revealed himself to him as the primal power. This vision made the pundit unconscious for a long time. After regaining partial consciousness, he uttered only the sound ka, ka, ka. He could not fully pronounce Kali, mother's name. A devotee: "Sir, you met Pandit Vidyasagar. What did you think of him?" Master: "Vidyasagar has both scholarship and charity, but he lacks inner vision. Gold lies hidden within him. Had he but found it out, his activities would have been reduced. Finally, they would have stopped altogether. Had he but known that God resides in his heart, his mind would have been directed to God in thought and meditation. Some persons must perform selfless work a long time before they can practice dispassion and direct their minds to the spiritual ideal, and at last be absorbed in God. The activities that Vidyasagar is engaged in are good. Charity is very noble. There is a great deal of difference between Daya, compassion, and Maya, attachment. Daya is good, but not Maya. Maya is love for one's relatives, one's wife, children, brother, sister, nephew, father, and mother. But Daya is the same love for all created beings, without any distinction. M. Is Daya also a bondage? Master, yes, it is. But that concept is something far beyond the ordinary man. Daya springs from sattva. Sattva preserves, rajas creates, and tamas destroys. But Brahman is beyond the three gunas. It is beyond Prakriti. All right, so he's talking about quite a few things there. This idea between Daya and Maya. Saying that Maya is love for one's relatives. Maya is egoistic love. So it's a love through relationship, a love through mind, right? And the mind places everything in relation to one another. You collect all these objects in your mind, store them there, and knowledge for the person of the mind, the worldly person, is linking relationship lines between all the objects in his mind. That's why in science, the first thing you do is categorize everything. And then you look for the likenesses and differences with everything. You draw lines between them, and that's normally what we call learning. And so we love some things more than others. But in Daya, in this higher state, everything is equal. We're not perceiving from an egoistic perspective. It's not going through mind necessarily, because what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, is God in everything. And so your love is equanimous. You don't have more for one person than another. You love everyone equally. And it's a very high state to be able to transcend your ego like that. I've told that story that one time when I first joined the monastery. It's a little edgy story, but it's a good one. I was taking the bus in San Francisco, and I had just become a monk a few months before, and this woman sat next to me, and she was, I guess, in a friendly mood, and asked me, she said, "Oh, where are you off to?" And I said, "Oh, I'm on my way back to the monastery." And she said, "Monastery?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a monk." And she said, "A monk?" And she got this bitter look on her face, and she says, "Are you one of those celibates?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I just don't understand you guys. What is wrong with you?" She's like, the one thing in life that brings us closer to everybody else, where we can experience union, through sex. And she went on about all the greatness of sex and these relationships and all of that. And it actually shook me a little, because it was, I'd been in the monastery less than a year. And so when I got back to the monastery, I told Swami, I said, "This woman told me, that sex was her ideal, because that's how she could meet this oneness with everybody. This was the deepest sharing possible in our human form." And she was very, very devoted to it. I said, and when I told her I was a monk, she was very distasteful toward that. I said, what's the truth of that? What do I do with that? And he said, "Oh, see, understand clearly that she will only be able to love a certain segment of people, and one at a time, presumably, or very few at a time. And her love for those people will have many, many requirements. They'll have to be the right gender, they'll have to be the right age, they'll have to be the right income, they'll have to be the right clothing, they'll have to be the right look, the right hair color, the right nationality, the right race. There's all kinds of requirements of that kind of love. And so in her highest ideal, she will only have a handful of people that she can truly love." He says, "But where's the monk's path as you go through this training?" He said, "Your ideal is to be able to connect with everyone and anyone, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of nationality, regardless of age and income and beauty and all of those other things. That this ideal will allow you to love everyone without expectation and requirement." You'll be able to care about everyone, whether or not they're attractive to you. And I heard that and I thought, wow, that's what Ramakrishna here is talking about in this difference. If you approach the world as a body and a mind, you'll always be limited in how much you can love somebody. You'll have all kinds of requirements. And if you follow the path of sensuality, of following the body, as you become more and more prolific, your body will develop more and more requirements. You'll become, you'll become a connoisseur. And so, so like if you like coffee, Folgers won't do it anymore. You'll have to go get the beans, that have come from a certain field in a certain quarter of a certain country in a certain part of the world and roasted to a certain degree in a certain way and freshly ground. And the more coffee you drink, the more particular you'll become about that. And that's the nature of Maya. That's the nature of the world. The ego, the world of ego, is constantly separating, constantly creating boundaries and maintaining those boundaries. So he's saying, this is why we practice through our meditation and through our japam, through our filling up our own inside and learning to recognize the presence of God within us, seeing that the divine is the energy that we express through ego. Once we come to know that within ourselves, we won't be able to help but see that in others, because there's no way to know another person. You can only know yourself, and you will always project what you know of yourself onto others. That's the way the world works, because we just don't have access to other people's local minds normally. And so we can't actually know another person. We can only presume them to be similar to ourselves. And he's talking about the three gunas. The three gunas are the fundamental building blocks of this universe. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Rajas is action. Somebody who can't sit still. Tamas is inertia, boredom, laziness. And Sattva is a perfect balance between the two, an equanimity of mind. And so, as he says, Rajas creates, Sattva maintains, and Tamas destroys. So these are the building blocks of the universe. But he's saying that, he says in the next paragraph he says, none of the three gunas can reach truth, right? Because the truth is transcendent, which means it's not of mind. So we don't study these things in order to place knowledge in our mind. We study these things to look at what they're pointing at, the thing that they can't describe, which is the you right now that is listening to my voice. The you that is watching your mind right now, the you that is watching your senses right now. And so the classes that we give and the studying that we do in spiritual life is not about the content. It's not about what we're looking at. It's always about who's looking at it within you. Who is the one that listens to your ear? Who is the one that looks out of your eyes? Who is the one that speaks through your mouth? And so we have to silence and turn our attention inward and then intuit that presence, because we are that. We can't objectify it. We can't look at it to study it. And this is what makes spiritual life such a difficult endeavor for most people, is because we assume that we have to learn about it in the traditional way. We unpack it and build little castles of philosophy in our mind and dance around through that philosophy thinking the answer lies in there somewhere. But it doesn't. The answer is alive and within you already. You just have to learn to put your attention on it, to put your awareness on it, to put your awareness on the awareness that is perceiving your body at this point. But none of these three gunas can reach truth. They are like robbers who cannot come to a public place for fear of being arrested. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are like so many robbers. Listen to a story. Once a man was going through a forest when three robbers fell upon him and robbed him of all of his possessions. One of the robbers said, "What is the use of keeping this man alive?" So saying, he was about to kill him with a sword, when the second robber interrupted him and said, "Oh no, What is the use of killing him? Tie his hands and feet and leave him here. The robbers bound his hands and feet and went away. After a while, the third robber returned and said to the man, "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you hurt? I will release you from your bonds." After setting the man free, the thief said, "Come with me. I will take you to a public highway." After a long time, they reached the road. Then the robber said, "Follow this road. Over there is your house." At this, the man said, "Sir, you've been so very good to me. Come with me to my house." "Oh, no," the robber replied. "I can't go there. The police will know it." This world itself is the forest. The three robbers prowling here are sattva, rajas, and tamas. They are the things that distract us and draw us into mind. And they are the things that we navigate. Everything that we do falls into one of those three categories. Either it's being created, it's being sustained, or it's being destroyed. I remember that's the nature of all things, no matter what you're engaged in. And it's reminding me when I had been in the monastery, I don't know, I think it was like 6 years or something like that, way back in the early 2000s. And I was feeling very dissatisfied, because I'd been in the monastery for 6 years, and I had talked to my father on the phone that morning. And he had kind of said, he says, every time I call you, you're either weeding a garden or washing a toilet or mopping the kitchen. He said, "When are you going to be a teacher? When are you going to start teaching things and such not like that?" And, I, I was kind of embarrassed, because really what he was telling me is he was very unsatisfied with what I was making of myself. And I felt a little ashamed. And, I went to Swami Prabhupada during lunch that day. And I said to him, "Maharaj," I said, "I'm really discouraged by my experience in the monastery so far." And he got interested and looked at me and said, "Oh, why? What is wrong?" I said, "Well, I just feel like I'm nothing more than a glorified maintenance engineer." I said, "I just go around keeping the toilets clean and washing the dishes and making the food and weeding the garden." I said, "I'm 40 years old, and I just thought there would be more to this." And he looked at me and he said, "Isn't that what everybody is doing? Everybody is only maintaining. All of us are just maintenance engineers. There's nothing else you can do in this world other than those three things. If you own a home, you'll have to maintain it. You'll have to build it, maintain it, and ultimately it will be taken from you. It's like that with everything in the world." And I sat there and pondered that, and very satisfied in that answer. And he told me further, he said, "See, in Vedanta, you're not a teacher when you say you're a teacher. You're a teacher when your life comes to a place where someone asks you to teach them. Then you are a teacher." And I was like, wow, God, that's such a healthy mindset. I loved that notion so much. So I was able to put everything away. And so he's saying the same thing here in this story, that the forest is the world. It's where we live, and it's robbing us, right? Anything that you manage to conjure together in this world will decay, will fall through your fingers at some point. And if you're not around long enough for it to decay, then you're going to decay and leave it all behind. So that's the nature of this world. And so he's saying, in this world, rajas is the activity, the doing, and that binds us, because we do in order to achieve a result. And so we have to live in time-space causation, which is mind. And as long as we're living in mind, we're living in the world of objects, and we can't see the divinity. We can't see God in it. It becomes its own thing. And he's likening them to these three robbers and their different states. And so rajas is what through activity binds us. And then tamas, let's kill him, let's get rid of him. Tamas is that destructive, that inertia, that laziness, not able to move. And that when that predominates, we fall into a deep delusion. We can't get out of it. Like depression is a great example of tamas. Once it takes over a mind, it's just so difficult to see beyond it. But then sattva Sattva is what brings us to an equilibrium. When we learn to control our senses, when we learn to find some dispassion in the mind and are able to quiet it down a little bit, we reach a state of equilibrium. And from there, the directions can be given. It's time for spiritual life in that sense. That robber took him to the highway and pointed and said, that is the way to go to get home. And so when we come to that state of sattva, that's when the teacher comes and points the way to home. And of course, we want to take the whole world with us, right? So he invites this robber, come to my house. And he says, no, I can't reach there, because inside our home is transcendent to mind. It's behind mind, metaphorically. And so anything that is of mind, all the senses, all of your thoughts, past, present, future, time, subject, object, relationship, all of those things belong to the tool. They don't belong to the reality. And so those tools are all necessary for this world, this worldly experience that we have, the world of objects and change, constant change. And the things of this world cannot touch us, because our true self is actually, there's a chasm between our true self and the material world. And nothing here can go there, right? And we are peering in, as it were. So the world itself is the forest. The three robbers prowling here are sattva, rajas, and tamas. It is they that rob man of knowledge, of truth. Tamas wants to destroy him. Rajas wants to bind him to the world. But sattva rescues him from the clutches of rajas and tamas. Under the protection of sattva, man is rescued from anger, passion, and the other evil effects of tamas. Further, sattva loosens the bonds of the world, loosens the bonds of the world. But sattva also is a robber. It cannot give him the ultimate knowledge of truth, though it shows him the road leading to the supreme abode of God. Setting him on the path, sattva tells him, look yonder, there is your home. Even sattva is far away from the knowledge of Brahman. What Brahman is cannot be described. Brahman is that highest conception of God. I say conception because we're using mind. And so God cannot be in the mind, cannot be described or limited in any way. So you can't give him any adjective. There is no adjective that can be acceptable in discussing Brahman. So Brahman cannot be described. Even he who knows it cannot talk about it, right? You can't talk about it because language itself requires the tool of the mind. A sentence requires subject, object, and verb, It needs past, present, and future. So language itself is a limitation. It makes us see the world in a particular way. And so the divine cannot be spoken of through language. There can be no word, because a word is a limit. And God, the divine, is beyond limit. So what Brahman is cannot be described. Even he who knows it cannot talk about it. There is a saying that a boat once reaching the black waters of the ocean cannot come back. Once, 4 friends in the course of a walk saw a place enclosed by a wall. The wall was very high. They all became eager to know what was inside the walls. One of them climbed to the top of the wall. What he saw on looking inside made him speechless with wonder. He only cried, ah, oh, and dropped in. He could not give any information about what he saw. The others too climbed the wall, uttered the same cry, ah, ah, and jumped in. Now, who was there to tell what was inside? Sages like Jadabharata and Dattatreya, after realizing Brahman, could not describe it. A man's eye completely disappears when he goes into samadhi after attaining the knowledge of Brahman. That is why Ram Prasad sang, addressing his mind, if you should find the task too hard, call upon Ram Prasad for help. The mind must completely merge itself in knowledge, but that is not enough. Ram Prasad, that is, the principle of I, must vanish too. Then alone does one get the knowledge of Brahman. So for this realization, for this highest knowledge of Brahman, You have to completely step out of mind. You have to find that unchanging absolute within the heart, the kingdom of God for the Christians, that residence of your true nature within you. And in that silent space, in that place with no story and no mind and no sense of separateness, God can be realized. We can see that truth. And then when we realize the nature of God, then we can see God everywhere. We'll recognize him everywhere. That's what brings us to that equanimity. And the world is no longer a distinct and separate thing from us. We see it as ourself. We see it as the whole, in which all things are one without a second. A devotee: Sir, is it possible then that Sukadeva did not have the ultimate knowledge? Master: According to some people, Shukadeva only saw and touched the ocean of Brahman. He did not dive into it. That is why he could return to the world and impart religious instruction. According to others, he returned to the world of name and form after attaining the knowledge of Brahman for the purpose of teaching others. He had to recite the Bhagavata to King Parikshit and had to teach people in various ways. Therefore, God did not destroy his I altogether. God kept in him the ego of knowledge. So you can see there, Ramakrishna, when he would go into samadhi, he would come down. He had some pet attachments that he kept in place so that he could inhabit a body, because with no attachments, the body drops off. There's no need for the body. The body is here to allow us to realize the truth, to realize God, to realize the divinity within. After that is done, the body falls off. They say 20 days or 12 days or something, that after you go into this deepest samadhi, but you don't come back. The ordinary person doesn't come back. Only the avatars and his companions are able to actually go up and down, to go into samadhi and then return from it. The rest of us jump over the wall like those four guys he just talked about. We climb up that wall, we gaze over, we see the party going on, and we're like, woo! Forget everything else and jump in. Enjoy that ecstasy, and forget all about the world. And what an avatar is, the divine presence, that pure divine presence. He's the only one willing to leave the party to come back and tell the rest of us what's going on and how to get there. Devotee: Can one keep up an organization after attaining the knowledge of Brahman? Master: Once I talked to Keshav Sen about the knowledge of Brahman. So Keshav Sen was the leader of the Brahmo Samaj, which was kind of a reform movement within Hinduism in Calcutta at the end of the 1800s there. Still goes on today, but not very powerfully. So once I talked to Keshav Sen about the knowledge of Brahman. He asked me to explain it further. I said, if I proceed further, you won't be able to preserve your organization and following. Oh, then please stop there, replied Keshav. Everyone laughs. But still, I said to Keshav, I and mine indicate ignorance. Yes, you see, this I and mine is the delusion. That's the untruth, that a you separate and apart from the whole exists. And that happens through identifying with the body and mind. When we think our thoughts are our thoughts and the body is my body, that changes the way we see God. We no longer see him as that universal oneness. We then see objects in separateness and assume ourselves to be separate from God and separate from the world and everything in the world. That was the curse of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was that sense of egoism, that sense of separateness. And so those two fingers, we have active minds that are full of thoughts and always busy and noisy, purely because of those two concepts, me and mine. They are unnatural to us, and so they stir up the mind. The mind has to reorganize itself in order to allow you to be separate and apart from the whole. And so that's when we, through that ego, which forms through attachment caused by the idea of me and mine, when that ego forms and we become a separate individual from the whole, that's where all vice comes from, when we serve a particular instead of the whole. Without ignorance, one cannot have such a feeling as I am the doer. These are my wife, children, possessions, name, and fame. Thereupon Keshav said, Sir, if I gave up the I, nothing whatsoever would remain. I reassured him and said, I am not asking you to give up all of the I. You should give up only the unripe I. The unripe I makes one feel that I am the doer. These are my wife and children. I am a teacher. Renounce this unripe I and keep the ripe I, which will make you feel that you are a servant of God, his devotee, and that God is the doer and you are his instrument. So this is a very important instruction for us, because he just got finished telling us that Advaita is really not available to the ordinary human being. So instead of just throwing up our hands and saying, oh, well, I guess I can't have what I want, I'll just go on something else. He's saying, no, what you do is you ripen your sense of I, right? You come to know, you go inside and you find yourself, you find the presence of God within. And then you make that the point and you make yourself understand it is the movement of God that moves you. And so you be through your discernment, through your watching the inner world very closely, you come to know the secrets of your mind, what triggers it, what catches it, what and the places where it hooks you and drags you in to the world of change. And it allows you to stand aloof to the world and to respond with your nature instead of reacting with your ego, right? So you respond from the nature of yourself, your Satchitananda, your love, your wisdom, your being, instead of reacting from egoism, which is full of concerns of maintaining its superiority and its separateness from everything. So the ripe I, he says, is that you're a servant of the beloved. So everything that you do, you go to the beloved first, and then you watch God do it through you. You hand all responsibility to the divine and all credit to the divine. And you just go on as the worker, as the machine, as it were. And you'll get to enjoy the constant company of the presence of the divine, the presence of bliss, the presence of love, the presence of joy, the presence of fullness. And you go on building this idea up inside, I'm the servant of God, or I'm the child of God, or I'm the devotee of God. And God can be your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your lover, any of these. Devotee, can the ripe I form an organization? Master, I said to Keshav Sen that the I that says I am a leader, I have formed this party, I am teaching people, that is the unripe I. So the one that takes responsibility for the credit or the discredit, the one who owns the work, that's unripe. That's not the proper understanding, because there's an unchanging reality behind this reality that is the truth. And that is our nature. And so we are the witness to these things. We're not the doer of them. It is very difficult to preach religion. It is not possible to do so without receiving the commandment of God. The permission of God is necessary. Shukadeva had a command from God to recite the Bhagavata. If, after realizing God, a man gets his command and becomes a preacher or teacher, then that preaching or teaching does no harm. His I is not unripe. It is ripe. I asked Keshav to give up this unripe I. The ego that feels I am the servant of God and lover of God does not injure one. I said to him, you have been constantly talking of your organization and your followers, but people also go away from your organization. Keshav answered, it is true, sir. After staying in it several years, people go to another organization. What is worse, on deserting me, they abuse me right and left. Why don't you study their nature? I said. Is there any good in making anybody and everybody a disciple? I said to Keshav further, You should accept the Divine Mother, the primal energy. Brahman is not different from its Shakti, right? So Brahman is not different from its power. God is not different from movement, right? From his power. What is Brahman is also Shakti. So this is a very high teaching. You know, this idea of the world of change being separate and apart from the absolute immortal unchanging is only a matter of perception at a particular point. That when we have our final realization, we see everything was God, everything was one, even the world of change was divine. But because of our ignorance, because of our ideas of me and mine, we couldn't recognize it. As long as a man remains conscious of the body, okay? See, this is how high we're going here. As long as you're conscious of your body, all right, which I don't even have anything to compare that to, right? We're always conscious of our body. We think this is who we are. As long as he is conscious of the body, he is conscious of duality, right? The me and not me. It is only when a man tries to describe what he sees that he finds duality. Keshav later on recognized Kali. One day, when Keshav was here with his disciples, I said to him that I would like to hear him preach. He delivered a lecture in the Chandi. Then we all sat by the bathing ghat and had a long conversation. I said to him, "It is Bhagavan alone who in one form appears as Bhakta and in another as the Bhagavata. Please repeat Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan." Keshav and his disciples repeated the words. Then I asked him to repeat Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava. Thereupon Keshav said, "Sir, I should not go so far now. People will say that I have become an orthodox Hindu." It is extremely difficult to go beyond the three gunas. One cannot reach that state without having realized God. Man dwells in the realm of Maya. Maya does not permit him to see God. It has made him a victim of ignorance. Right? So the world as you think it is Maya. Your story that links one moment to a presumed other moment, that creates the narrative of your life, that is Maya. That is the delusion. So that which you think you are seeing, that which you think you are experiencing, is your delusion. It's what keeps you separate and prevents you from seeing God, because what you're actually seeing is the unity. You know, what you're actually seeing is just waves of thought in a mind that has been turned into a universe by you. Right? Once Hriday brought a bull calf here. I saw one day that he had tied it with a rope in the garden so that it might graze here. I asked him, "Hriday, why do you tie the calf there every day?" "Uncle," he said, "I am going to send this calf to our village. When it grows strong, I shall yoke it to the plow." As soon as I heard these words, I was stunned to think, how inscrutable is the play of the divine Maya. Karmarpur and Sihor are so far away from Calcutta. This poor calf must go all that way. Then it will grow, and at length it will be yoked to the plow. This is indeed the world. This is indeed Maya. I fell down unconscious. Only after a long time did I regain consciousness. You know, so that world of suffering that Buddha was so concerned about, you know, this Maya, we don't often, within Maya, we have our suffering and we have our joy, but even our joy within Maya is suffering compared to the bliss of knowledge of the self. You know, it's so our scale would change radically. And so Ramakrishna is so affected by this level of delusion, this level of bondage that this poor calf is going to endure in its life, that he literally falls down unconscious, just overwhelmed by how deep Maya is and how severe Maya is. All right, so now we're breaking into a new time. It was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And
I have a question.
yes, yes, please.
So when we are talking about Maya, in a way, aren't we the part, it always confuses me when Thakur says Jnana is not, is very hard. But yet we find ourselves talking about Jnana, like, in terms of being aware of the awareness or the I being ripe or unripe, or
Right.
even Maya we are talking about,
Hmm.
which is also to me a part of the Jnana path. Um, uh, and whether one sees Brahman in all or God in all, it kind of one and the same. But when Thakur so vehemently says that path of Jnana is really difficult, or is he saying Advaita is difficult? I know that Advaita is one of the paths in Jnana. So it always kind of shakes me up, because when a devotee asks Ramana Maharishi, is the method of inquiry for me, and he says, if you say I, that means that you are fit to do the path of inquiry, and the path of inquiry was the path of Jnana. Um, so I don't know. I kind of wanted to clarify that in my mind.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is Advaita is a realization. It's not a path. There is no Advaitic practice, because if you're practicing, you're in duality. So Advaita is what we realize. The path to get there is Jnana. One of them, one of the four paths is Jnana. And the reason that it's so difficult is that you have to come to a point where you don't notice your body, where we see Vivekananda had that experience at Kasipur, where he had this super high meditation where he went into the other realm, and when he was trying to find his way back, he could only find his head, and he was sitting there calling out to his brother disciples, help, help. And they run up to get Thakur, to help him come and find the rest of his body, because he had so left the identity with the physical world, with the material world. And so it's very difficult to function in the world that way. Plus, the real reason is, uh, in order to reach that kind of level of purity, is very difficult to begin with. And secondly, as you're practicing in the morning, you may spend an hour, 2, or even 3 hours in meditation doing that practice. You may even approach those ideas, but then you're going to get up and make breakfast. And within an hour, you're going to completely undo all of the state that your intense practice had delivered you to. And then you're going to spend the rest of the day in that state of delusion, dealing with objects and bodies constantly all day long, before you sit down again for another hour. And there's just, it's very difficult to get actual forward movement. These guys that realize God through the path of Jnana, they disappeared into the mountains. They disappeared off into the hills. They got out of
Mhm.
civilization. They renounced the workaday world so that they wouldn't have to constantly rebuild the house, every time they sat down to meditate. So
Mhm.
they would get into this state of awareness, of knowing and seeing the truth, and they could hold that state,
Right.
because they were in a conducive, silent environment where nobody was reminding them of body, nobody was reminding them of ego. And then they would sit down and practice again and be able to start at that space and move forward, start at that space and move forward, start at that space and move forward until they're established. And that's really the environment that it takes for someone who's going to actually practice Jnana as the way. Uh, uh, and so what we're doing, Ramakrishna's way, is this Jnana Bhakti, which we're still kind of, at least from my perspective, still kind of playing with, still trying to figure out exactly how it goes. Ramakrishna only mentions it in one place in there, but so it's kind of a combination. We sort of use our jnana to help build our dispassion. We use
Mhm.
our jnana to help us to separate our, to remember that we're not body mind, and that will help us to break our attachments of our passions, break the attachments of our egoism, and to minimize them. and then that love, which is equanimous and unconditioned, manifests as grace for us. And in that, through that grace, we're able to get the mind to let go of us, to let us go. Whereas in Jnana, you don't have that concept necessarily. You don't have that. You're not
But
relying on that concept of the divine and divine grace. And so you have to get your mind to let go of you by being a really well-behaved person, so that your guilt and shame and whatnot aren't activated in mind, so that that attachment can break. So breaking that through grace is a real shortcut, as opposed to breaking it through perfection.
for some people, the love comes easy, right? And for
Uh,
some, it doesn't.
well, yes, it's true. We all have different dispositions, but none of us are lost. Gyan is a difficult path, no doubt, but it is a path, and you can obviously realize God that way. It may take more than one lifetime. In this lifetime, you may have household responsibilities in life, but you practice your jnana and you come to a certain place, and in your next life, perhaps the situation will be different. Your circumstances will be different. You will move toward God. You will find God, and you will realize God through that path. It's just longer. It takes longer.
But like, Anand, or even like Sumi, or even Holy Mother, they all utilize both, right? They were
Yes,
both. They had um, the love, and then, but they were all very high up in jnana, as I mean, ultimately that was their
absolutely. Yeah,
uh,
all of us have the same realization. All four paths have the same realization. They all go to the same place. And that's the magic of Thakur, as far as I understand. Before Thakur, these four paths were taught as different paths and were separate and apart from each other. Ramakrishna says that it's more of a matter of emphasis. It's not that we're bhakti and we dump the other three. He says we're bhaktas, and then we can we can put jnana in our pocket and use it as we need it. We can put our karma yoga in a pocket and use it as it's helpful and needed, and our raja yoga in our back pocket and use
but
it.
Swamiji taught jnana then, right? I mean, he taught jnana out and out.
When he came to the United States, he did primarily talk about jnana initially, but he wanted to bring us the idea of God as mother. So he was also going to go through this jnana bhakti ideal also. But since we had the bhakti training already because of Christianity in the West, he didn't spend much time with that. He brought the ideas that we didn't have, the ideas of one without a second, that we didn't have, the idea of having different relationships with God, that God could be seen as mother or brother or child or lover. We didn't have that flexibility in the West, and he wanted to bring us that because he knew we could be benefited from that. He didn't want to bring over another avatar, another Jesus, that we would all have to change our ways of everything in order to accompany. So he primarily stuck to the higher philosophies, that which we didn't have already. And then I presume, because of the way the order has gone over the last 100 years, that the rest of it came and followed. Now we're trying to find a cohesiveness, a wholeness, by using all four of the paths, but having bhakti as our primary directive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I only ask because I mean, at the initial stage, wherever, or at whatever stage, whatever it is, you find yourself utilizing whatever comes to you for that moment, whatever works.
yes,
And so at certain times one might say, it's God and the devotee, and at other times, the jnana works better. But when Thakur says like this, then it's like, okay, you gotta second guess yourself. So anyhow, thank you.
yeah, sure. So that's the beautiful thing within the world of Ramakrishna, the bhakti. We can grab all of the scriptures, all the paths, and put it in there. The challenge is that is having our devotion undone by the Gyannic scriptures. You know, when they say that there's God is one without a second, everything is illusory, you start losing that devotion for God. You know, you're like, well, if this is all illusory, you know, it kind of undoes your love.
But then
And
to
so
me,
really,
God and Brahman is same, right? I
well,
view it the way that's how I put my hand around it. Philosophy may not say so, but from Brahman you get the attributes and you get the form and you get God. But
absolutely,
the essence of it is all Brahman.
yeah,
So whether we
everything.
call it Gyanik Brahman or devotee
No, no, no,
God,
no. At that level, there is no jnana, bhakti, raja, or karma. There's no more yogas.
yeah,
Once a person knows that God is the substrate of all things, meaning knowing in the sense of grok, knowing in the sense of experiencing and seeing it, not in just
right,
knowing mentally.
right.
Uh, so yes, at that level, they're all the same. But getting to that level, the mind makes distinctions, and so uh, he just says that love will make the path quicker for you, and it's natural to the mind, you know, and guide yourself. Use jnana, you know, to understand why lust and greed are not helpful. Use it to understand why the world is temporary. You know, that changing the world of change cannot provide any lasting reward for an immortal self, for a self
Mm,
that will long outlast the changing world. You know, so we use Gana in all those ways,
mm,
uh, according to our disposition. You know, that person who can't sit still, they're not going to do well at meditating. So we're going to give them karma yoga. You know, okay, well, you go and fix the flowers for the shrine. You go and clean up the kitchen. You know, we do those things as service to the divine.